They've been lying to you your entire life. Every history class you sat through, every textbook you opened, every documentary you watched, all carefully crafted lies designed to hide the truth about history's most vicious slave empire. While they forced you to memorize dates about Virginia tobacco farms and British slave ships, they deliberately erased the Netherlands from your education. Why? Because what the Dutch did to our ancestors was so unspeakably brutal that even other slave traders called them monsters. Picture a country smaller than South Carolina, ripping over 23,000 Africans from their homeland in just 11 years. Imagine human beings bought for pocket change and sold for massive profits, while Dutch stockholders sipped wine in Amsterdam cafes. Think about colonial laws so savage that rebellious slaves were burned alive over slow fires while their families were forced to watch. It's happened. Your teachers know it happened. Your government knows it happened. And they've spent centuries making sure you never learn about it. But today, we are tearing down their wall of lies. Today, you'll discover the truth about the cruelest slave masters you never learned about and why they never wanted you to know their names.
The year is 1650. Walk through the Amsterdam Stock Exchange and you'll hear wealthy merchants in silk coats trading shares in human misery like it's wheat or timber. 40 angolins from the latest shipment, one calls out. Prime condition, no disease markings. The Dutch West India Company had turned our ancestors into a publicly traded commodity, complete with quarterly earnings reports mailed to investors across Europe. Company records show they calculated a 30% death rate into every voyage, meaning they planned for 120 people to die on every ship carrying 400. Between 1637 and 1648, Dutch ships dragged over 23,000 Africans through the ports of Elmina and Luanda alone. The Dutch kept meticulous records of their human trafficking, over 6.7 million guilders in total profit. They were so obsessed with money that they recorded the exact cent. But here's what'll make your blood boil. They had no shame about it. Spanish colonists at least pretended they were saving souls. British settlers claimed they were bringing civilization. The Dutch, they called enslaved Africans pieces of ebony in their ship manifests, listed right between barrels of sugar and balls of cloth. Dr. Johannes Postma's research into Dutch archives reveals transportation designed around maximum profit through mass death. The slave ship Middelburg Chevelvaart packed 400 people into spaces meant for 200, knowing exactly how many would die. When survivors stumbled off Dutch ships, witnesses described them as walking skeletons covered with tan leather. And when those skeletons could no longer work, the Dutch simply ordered fresh ones. What the Dutch did next makes American slave codes look like gentle suggestions. Imagine living under laws where striking your master meant having your right hand chopped off, where running away 3 times meant automatic execution, where participating in any rebellion meant being burned alive over a slow fire while your children watched. This was Article 61 of the Dutch Colonial Code, a law so brutal that contemporary historians call Dutch slavery much harsher than any other European system. While British territories allowed enslaved people to testify in court, and Spanish colonies had judges who could hear appeals, Dutch law offered nothing, no protection, no appeals, no mercy. Marcus Garvey's research revealed the calculated psychology behind this cruelty. Governor Simon Wilfred van Hogenheim's letters to Amsterdam from 1762 are preserved in the Dutch National Archives. Fear, he wrote, is the only effective method of control over such large numbers. The Berbice colonial records contain the evidence of this systematic terror. In 1761, an enslaved man named Primo had his ears cut off for talking back to an overseer. In 1762, a woman called Saba received 50 lashes for hiding food for her sick child. These weren't random acts of violence. They were deliberate policy designed to break the human spirit. Dutch plantation managers received bonuses for maintaining what company documents called proper discipline through public punishment. The more fear they created, the more money they made. This system of legalized torture controlled 3,833 enslaved people, with just 346 white colonists. For over a century, pure terror kept our ancestors in chains. But terror, no matter how calculated, can only last so long before it breaks. And if you think they stopped there, you haven't seen anything yet. The Dutch would go on to commit atrocities that make these laws look like gentle warnings. If you want to see how deep this systematic cruelty goes and why they spent centuries hiding it from you, subscribe to Black Stories Untold.
We're about to expose how this reign of terror finally met its match. Now, back to the story. February 23rd, 1763. Magdalenenburg Plantation on the Kanye River. The air is thick with the smoke of rebellion. An enslaved man the Dutch records call only Primo stands holding a burning torch to the plantation house. Behind him, dozens of men and women who have lived their entire lives in terror are watching their prison burn. For months, the conditions had been building toward this explosion. The 7 Years' War had cut off supply ships. No vessels had reached Berbice between November 1762 and March 1763. Enslaved people were receiving half rations, while Dutch colonists hoarded food in their mansions. Disease had killed 42 of the 60 soldiers at Fort Nassau, leaving the colony nearly defenseless. But this wasn't spontaneous rage. Court testimonies taken after the rebellion reveal something that terrified the Dutch far more than random violence: careful organization. Cuffy, a 45-year-old cooper on Hollandia Plantation, had been secretly building an underground network for months. Enslaved people had been stealing gunpowder grain by grain, hiding machetes in tobacco fields, and coordinating through drum signals that traveled faster than any Dutch messenger. When Primo's flames lit the night sky, those drums carried the message 50 miles upriver in hours. By dawn on February 24th, 8 plantations were burning, and 2,000 formerly enslaved people were marching toward the symbol of Dutch power, Fort Nassau. Governor Van Hogenheim's panicked letter to Suriname, preserved in colonial archives, captures the shock. The Negroes have risen in general revolt. We are in extreme danger and require immediate assistance. But Van Hogenheim had no idea what was coming next. Cuffy wasn't just planning to burn down plantations. He was about to do something that would shake every European colony in the Americas. By March 15, 1763, something unprecedented was happening in Berbice. Black people were governing themselves. Cuffy didn't just seize territory, he built a functioning state. He declared himself governor of Free Berbice and appointed Akara as captain general. They established courts to settle disputes, organized labor brigades to maintain captured plantations, and created food distribution systems to prevent starvation. This wasn't the chaotic slave revolt that Europeans expected. Dutch merchant Jan Rensselaer, captured at Parabone Plantation, later testified that the rebels conducted themselves with more order than we had expected from slaves. But Cuffy's masterstroke came on April 2, 1763, when he wrote a letter that still exists in the Dutch National Archives. In formal diplomatic language, as one head of state to another, he proposed something revolutionary. Your Excellency may keep the seacoast, and we shall retain the inland territories. Both parties may engage in trade, and we can live in peace as neighbors. Read those words again. An enslaved man was negotiating with a European governor as an equal, proposing the first black governed territory in the Americas, decades before Haiti. For 8 months, this vision became reality. Cuffy's government controlled 70% of Berbice's territory. They maintained sugar mills, organized crop rotations, established diplomatic relations with indigenous tribes, and proved that Africans could govern themselves as effectively as any European power. Every plantation owner from Barbados to Virginia watched in terror as word spread. Enslaved people could not only fight back, they could run things better than their masters. But success would make them enemies across the entire Caribbean, and the full weight of European colonialism was about to crush down on them. News of Cuffy's success spread through the Caribbean like wildfire, and everywhere it went, it struck terror into the hearts of white colonists. By June 1763, plantation owners across the Americas were having nightmares about their own enslaved populations following Cuffy's example. The very idea that black people could govern themselves effectively threatened the foundation of every colonial economy. Jenny Clark Sr., who owned 7 plantations in Dutch Guyana, didn't even wait for official permission. He dispatched 5 armed ships carrying 300 Barbadian militiamen straight to Berbice. The French governor of Cayenne sent military advisors. St. Eustatius provided weapons and ammunition. The entire Caribbean colonial system was mobilizing to crush this dangerous example of black self-governance. But the Dutch played their cruelest card when they turned to their indigenous allies. Colonial records show payments of 1,200 guilders in rum and trade goods to Carib and Arawak communities along the Essequibo River. These communities, bound by a treaty signed in 1686, became the hunters who would trap every rebel trying to escape to freedom. Captain John Baptiste, an Arawak leader, personally captured 67 fleeing rebels near the Quarantine River. His men knew every hidden waterway, every secret path through the interior that rebels used to escape. They closed off every route to freedom in neighboring territories. As European reinforcements poured into Berbice, the pressure on rebel leadership became unbearable. Cuffy continued advocating for negotiated partition, while Akara demanded total military victory. Court records from captured rebels reveal heated arguments during council meetings, with the philosophical split becoming personal. On October 19, 1763, the conflict reached its breaking point. Akara accused Cuffy of weakness, while Cuffy accused Akara of leading their people to destruction. That night, unable to watch his dream of peaceful black self-governance crumble, Cuffy made the ultimate sacrifice. He took his own life rather than watch his vision die slowly.
With Cuffy dead and rebel leadership shattered, the Dutch launched what they called their final solution to the Berbice problem. 600 soldiers arrived from Amsterdam under Colonel Louis Henry Forjou, carrying orders to restore order through exemplary punishment. Forjou's military journal, published in 1796, reads like a manual for extermination. The Dutch strategy was methodical destruction. They burned food gardens to create starvation, poisoned water sources to force surrender, and used trained dogs to hunt refugees hiding in interior swamps. Captain Otto, who had seized leadership after Cuffy's death, tried to continue the fight from Highland strongholds, but hunger proved more deadly than bullets. Dutch records show rebels surrendering at a rate of 50 per week simply because they had nothing left to eat. On April 15, 1764, the last rebel leader, Captain Akabra, was captured hiding in a cave near the Berbice River mouth. The dream of free Berbice was over. What happened next was designed to ensure no enslaved person would ever dare dream of freedom again. Between April and September 1764, Dutch authorities conducted what they cynically called necessary trials for 892 captured rebels. The Berbice Court of Justice sentenced 128 people to death, but that number barely scratches the surface of the real slaughter. 24 rebels were burned alive in public squares, while the surviving population was forced to watch. An estimated 1,800 people died during the rebellion and its aftermath, nearly half the colony's black population. Dutch newspapers published detailed descriptions of these executions, with the Amsterdamse Courant describing the necessary severity required to prevent future uprisings. They wanted the entire Dutch Empire to know exactly what happened to those who dared seek freedom. The final insult? Within 6 months of crushing the rebellion, company records show the Dutch imported 1,200 new enslaved Africans to replace their losses. Human beings reduced to inventory numbers on a balance sheet. But perhaps the most evil thing the Dutch did was what came next. They erased it all from history. The same government that burned Cuffy's followers alive now runs museums in Amsterdam, celebrating that golden age of exploration and trade. The Rijksmuseum, opened in 1885, displays 8,000 objects from the colonial period, with exactly 0 mentions of slavery profits. Dr. Gert Oostendy's research into Dutch educational curricula reveals systematic erasure designed to protect national pride. A 1960 Ministry of Education directive explicitly stated that colonial history should emphasize positive contributions to world civilization. Dutch textbooks teach children about Admiral Mathilde Roeder's naval victories and the Dutch East India Company's spice trade, while completely erasing the West India Company's human trafficking. When slavery is mentioned at all, they blame African chiefs, claiming Europeans simply purchased people who were, quote, already enslaved through tribal warfare. They conveniently omit company records showing Dutch traders deliberately armed rival tribes to increase their supply of captives. Heroes like Queen Njinga of Angola, who fought Portuguese slavers for 30 years, remain completely unknown in Dutch schools. King Agaja of Dahomey, who spent his entire reign trying to expel European slave traders, appears in 0 Dutch textbooks. And Cuffy, the man who nearly established the first free black territory in the Americas, who proved that Africans could govern themselves as effectively as any European power, Dutch children have never heard his name. It wasn't until December 19, 2022, 359 years later, that Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte finally apologized for his country's role in slavery. But even this apology was carefully worded to avoid financial responsibility.
scheduled during Christmas week when most people were distracted, and held at the National Archives rather than a public square where descendants could attend. Meanwhile, Amsterdam's wealth still rests on foundations built with our ancestors' blood. Those picturesque canal houses, financed by slave profits. The prestigious University of Amsterdam, built with West India Company donations. The Netherlands' entire head start in global capitalism, paid for by African suffering. But here's what they could never erase: the truth. While the Netherlands hides Cuffy's name from their children, in Guyana, February 23rd is Republic Day, a national holiday honoring his rebellion. A bronze monument in Georgetown Square of the Revolution shows Cuffy breaking chains with an inscription that reads, 1763, so others might be free. Our ancestors like Cuffy and Akara, or just victims, they were visionaries who came closer than anyone before them to creating a free black nation in the Americas. For 8 months, they proved that Africans could govern themselves, establish justice, maintain agriculture, and negotiate as equals with European powers. They showed the world what was possible when black people controlled their own destiny. That's why every European colony mobilized to destroy them. That's why the Dutch burned survivors alive. That's why they spent centuries erasing this history from textbooks. Because they knew that if we ever learned what our ancestors accomplished, we'd realize there's nothing we can't do. Every time we tell Cuffy's story, we prove that their centuries-long campaign of erasure has failed. If this video opened your eyes to the lies they've been teaching, smash that subscribe button and share this with everyone who needs to know the truth. And Cuffy's story is just the beginning. While Hollywood gave you fictional Wakanda, they never told you about the real African kingdoms that had architectural marvels when Europe was in the Dark Ages. Click the video appearing on your screen right now to learn about these forgotten civilizations, because the truth they tried to bury is the truth that will set us free.